Hi, welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we will continue for home section and we will apply some more style to home section. In last lecture, we wrote this HTML markup for home content and this is the current view of home section. Right now, there is no style applied for home content. When I say home content, I mean these headings, paragraph and button. In this lecture, we are going to start applying style to home content. Let us do it. I am going to style.css file. Before I start applying style to home content, I have to write some generic CSS for solo website. So let us first write generic CSS for this solo website. I am going to add my generic CSS at the top of this style.css file. I am going to add comment for generic CSS. And the comment is HTML and body. And we are going to add some generic CSS which will be applied for elements inside HTML and body tags of solo website. I'm just creating some space. Okay, the very first thing I want to do is to have my web page 100% of browser height. I want to set the height of this web page with 100%. And we do it like this way. I'm going to select HTML and body elements at a time. By this way, you can select multiple elements at a time and you just need to separate them by comma. Okay, as I said, I want this web page height to be 100% of browser height. I'm going to write CSS height property and the value is 100%. The reason I'm doing this because we are going to design our home section to be full screen. I mean the home section should cover the entire browser window. Therefore, it is important to set HTML and body elements with 100% heights. And later we will set home section height to be 100% too. Next, I want to set the generic color for body tag. I'm going to select body element. The color I'm going to set is this gray color. This is the hexa value of this gray color. I am going to write CSS color property and the value is #2122226. This is the hexa value for this gray color. This will be generic color for all the elements inside body tag. Now I want to set generic font for all of headings. I am going to select all the 6 headings. There are total 6 headings in HTML. H1, H2, H3, H4, H5 and H6. The H1 defines the most important heading and the H6 defines the least important heading. The font I have decided to use for all headings is Railway. So I'm going to write CSS font family property and I will assign font to all of these headings and the font is Railway. And I am going to define second font which is sans serif as an alternate in case browser doesn't find Railway font. So this sans serif font will be used as an alternate font. Next, I am going to define some generic CSS for p element. I am going to select p element and the very first thing I want to define for p element is font family. I'm going to write CSS font family property. And the font I have decided to use for p element is Open Sans font. So I'll simply define Open Sans as font for p element. And I'm going to define second font sans serif as an alternative font. Next, I'm going to define the font size for p element. And the font size is 13 pixels. And after that, I'm going to set the font weight property and the font weight is 400. The CSS font weight property sets how thick or thin characters in text should be displayed. One last thing I want to set for p element is line height. And the line height should be 24 pixels. This is going to specify the line height for p element. Next, I want to set some generic CSS for section element. We will be mostly using section element for solo website and let me show you the demo version of solo website. This is the demo version of solo website and if you notice the background color for most section is white. As you can see, there is white background for this section. There is white background for this section. So therefore, I am going to set the background for section tag with white color. I am going to select section element and I am going to set the background for section element as white. I am going to write CSS background property and I am going to define the white color. This is the hexa value for white color. And I want the CSS overflow property with hidden value. I am going to write CSS overflow property and the value is hidden. The overflow property specifies what happens if content overflows an element box. For section element, I want the overflow to be hidden. Okay, this is all about generic CSS for solo website. Please go ahead and add this generic CSS to your style.css file. Now let us start applying CSS to the content of home section. I'll remove this extra space. Okay, I'll straight go to the home section right here and we will continue styling home section. If you notice, the full screen video has been disappeared and it is because of white background which we just set for section element. This one. For home we are also using section element. Let me show you. As you can see that for home we are also using section element, therefore it also gets white background, but we will set the background for home section to be none. I am going to select the home section and the ID for home section is just home, and I'm going to set the background for home section to be none. I'm going to write background and the value is none, and you can see that the video is back. Next, I am going to set the height of home section with 100%. By this way, it is going to make sure that home section covers the entire browser window as we did for HTML and body elements. This one. So this is going to make sure that the home section will cover the entire browser window. Now I will move forward and you can see we have this home content. Right now it is in the center but not in the middle of home section. Now what we are going to do, we will vertically align this content and it is going to be in the middle of home section. Let us do it. I am going to index.html file. For home content, we created these two divs. The first one is this home content div and the second is this home content inner div. You can think it is parent div and it is its child div. And the reason I created these two divs, I want to vertically center the content inside them. Therefore, I need these two divs, or I can say these two divs are going to help us to vertically align the content inside them. I would like you to visit this URL and have a look at this article which discusses different methods of vertically centering using CSS. On this page, you will find different methods of vertical centering using CSS, and I am using one of them, which is this Css Table Method, where we need a parent div and a child div inside it, and we vertically center the content using table. Let us apply this method. I'll go back to style.css. First, I am going to select the parent div and the ID value for parent div is home-content. I'm going to select parent div with its ID and the ID is home-content. Now I'm going to set the width and height values with 100%. I'm going to write CSS width property and the value is 100%. Next, I'm going to specify the height property and the value is also 100%. By this way, it will grow up and it will take the full width and height of home section. Next, we need to set the display property for this parent div, and as per this method, the value for display is table for parent div. I'm going to write CSS display property and the value is table, and by this way it is going to act as a table. After that, I'm going to select the child div, and the child div is this home content hyphen inner div. I'm going to select the child div with its ID, and the ID is home hyphen content hyphen inner. As per this method, the child div should act as a table cell. I am going to set the display property for this inner div, and it should act as a table cell. So it is kind of table cell for this table. Next we need to do is to set the vertical align as middle. As per this article, we need to set the vertical align as middle. I'm going to write CSS vertical align property, and the value is middle. Perfect. Now the content of home section is vertically aligned, and it is exactly in the middle of home section. If I resize my browser window, it will always stay in the middle of browser window. Perfect. Now the content of home section is exactly in the middle of home section, and this is what we wanted. It is one of the best CSS technique to vertically center the content, and I highly recommend reading and understanding this article for vertical centering elements using CSS. Okay, now let us start applying CSS to these headings and paragraph. I'm going to index.html file, and we will first have a look at HTML markup for these elements. For headings, we have this main wrapper, and inside this main wrapper we have two h1 elements, and the ID value for this main wrapper is home hyphen heading. Let's apply some CSS to these h1 elements. I'm going to select the main wrapper, and the ID value for main wrapper is home hyphen heading. Home hyphen heading. And inside this main wrapper we have h1 elements. By this way we can apply CSS to all h1 elements which are inside home hyphen heading div. The very first CSS I want to apply to these h1 elements is color property. I'm going to specify CSS color property, and the value is white color. And now you can see that there is white color for these headings. Next I'm going to specify the font size for these headings, and the value for font size should be 65 pixels. And now you can see that these headings have large font size. After that I'm going to specify the font weight property, and the font weight should be 100 because I want these headings to be thin, and now you can see that these headings are thin. Next I'm going to specify the CSS Text Transform property, and the value for CSS Text Transform property is uppercase. The Text Transform property controls the capitalization of text. In this case I want these headings to be in uppercase letters. Now you can see that these headings are in uppercase. After that I'm going to remove the default margin. I'm going to write CSS margin property, and I'm going to set it to 0. By this way it is going to remove the default margins if there is any. And one last thing for these headings is I'm going to set the CSS display property, and it should be inline block. By setting display inline block, it will be inline. Inline block elements are like inline elements, and they get proper width and height. And now you can see that these headings are getting proper width and height. If I remove this display property, now you can see that these headings are taking the full width of browser window. And when I put back the display property as inline block, and now it is taking proper width and height. Next we need to define some unique CSS for this agency word. I'm going to index.html file, and I'll first have a look at HTML markup for agency word. As you can see, I have wrapped this agency word in a span, and now I can easily target this agency word using span. I'm going to select that span element like this way. We have home hyphen heading div. This is the main wrapper. This main wrapper. and inside this we have h1 element. So I'm going to write h1, and then inside h1 we have to target this span element. So I'll write it like this way: span. I want to set the color for this agency word, and the color should be moon yellow color, and the hexa value for moon yellow color is this F4C613. I'll simply copy this hexa value, and I'm going to set this moon yellow for this span element. And now there is yellow moon color for this agency word. Next, I want this agency word to be thick, and for that I'm going to use CSS font weight property, and the value for this font weight property is 500. And now you can see that this agency word is thick. You can see this color preview before color property. This is because of brackets CSS color preview extension which we installed in the beginning of this course. It is helping to preview the color. Perfect. I'll go ahead, I'll save my style.css. Okay, this lecture is taking too long. I'll stop here and I'll continue by next lecture. In next lecture, we'll try to finish styling home section. So I'll see you in next class. Thanks.